Hey KU basketball fans, this is Jesse Newell, Jayhawk beat writer for the Kansas City Star, reminding you it's almost basketball season. Download the new KU Hoops app to keep up with all the KU men's basketball action. The KU Hoops app has in-depth analysis from the Star's award-winning sports writing team, as well as news on recruiting and game previews. Use the KU Hoops app to keep up with Coach Self as he tries to take the Jayhawks to their 13th straight Big 12 regular season title. Download the free KU Hoops app at the Apple or Google Play stores now. Welcome back to the Sports Beat KC podcast. This is Jesse Newell, KU beat reporter for the Kansas City Star. I'm joined once again this week by CJ Moore of Bleacher Report. CJ, how's your week going?
Well, Jesse, it's going all right. Probably not as good as you since you're sitting in Hawaii right now.
Yeah, that seems to make the week go a little bit better. Some palm trees outside the hotel window and some nice weather, not needing any long pants or jackets anywhere. But, yeah, in Honolulu, getting ready for KU's game against Indiana coming up, a top 15 matchup to kick off the season. But before we get to our interview with Zach Osterman of the Indianapolis Star, some interesting things he said in there, just talking about Indiana, kind of the transition they've gone through the last year after getting really beaten up by Duke early last season. They kind of had a turnaround and a whole change of thought when it came to Tom Crean and the fan base, their feelings on Tom Crean. But before that, I just wanted to get to kind of a state of the union with KU basketball as the season is about to begin, CJ. I guess we'll start off with that. What do you think? How prepared is KU for the season? And I guess what are the main storylines you see as the first game approaches?
Well, I mean, I think they have almost the perfect roster to go into a big game like this. I mean, you look at Indiana, they've got some questions at point guard, a transfer, going to be their starting point guard. That's their spot to be in it as for a first game, where KU's got a lot of consistency carrying on over from last year, got two starting point guards back in your starting lineup. You have a big man, Landon Lucas, who has experience anchoring you in the post. Some guys off the bench who have experience. Obviously, the biggest question mark, and we've talked about it for a while, and, I brought it up to you like 3 weeks ago. Almost, I feel like it was kind of like a forewarning for what happened in the two exhibition games. Bill Self had not been happy with Carlton Bragg at that point, and we kind of saw it in the exhibition games how it played out. He looks to me right now like a player who's got a lot going on upstairs, and I think we saw that really in that Washburn game. 15 minutes, 5 fouls, couldn't catch the ball and lay it in when he was wide open. So I think that's kind of while KU's going into this game like with a lot of good things that you can write about and feel pretty good about. I think the fact that Bragg is kind of trying to figure things out is a little bit scary for KU because he could potentially be matched up with OG Ananabu. I'm going to probably mispronounce that. That's one of the hardest names to say in college basketball. Who, I think we'll talk about this later with Zach. I think is Indiana's potentially best player down the road.
And Anunoby. That's what I learned from talking with Zach. Yeah, no, the thing about Carlton that it might not be as scary in other years, but there was a great piece by Sam Mellinger. I'd encourage people to go check it out on the Star about Carlton Bragg and his quote funk, and Bill Self really challenging him at this early point in the season to be better and really getting after him to be an improved player. We've seen Bill Self do this with past guys in past years, the Russell Robinsons, the Morris twins. I mean, challenging guys and then able to get the best out of them. I think the concern more this year is that when that's happened in the past, KU's had the depth to maybe overcome that if you wanted to bench a guy or to sit him out. But, man, that we had a little bit on Wednesday. We were on the USS Chafee with the KU basketball team. There was a little bit of a mini controversy when there was an Instagram photo by Jarence Howard tweeted out and sent out through Instagram that showed Landon Lucas in a walking boot. And so, Bill Self says he's fine, just trying to protect against soreness. He practiced and all those things. But, you think about Landon Lucas, if he did go down with an injury, he's not for this game. But, boy, that makes their front court really thin. I've already talked about in some pieces that I've written about how, you look down the bench and Bill Self doesn't have guys he can trust yet. Mitch Lightfoot is a guy who is going too fast at this point and just needs to settle down a little bit. Good energy, but just doesn't really know what he's doing. Dwight Colby's not explosive at all, and he's not giving KU what they thought they were getting a year ago when he transferred in. Part of that because of the torn ACL, but beyond that, what big guys do you have? You have Udoka Azubuike, who, again, very talented guy, doesn't know what he's doing at the offense, and fouled out in one of the exhibition games in 8 or 9 minutes. So a big question mark there, and that's your front court. I mean, there's nobody else on this roster. So, again, you're going to ask Landon Lucas to play a bunch of minutes early, and then you're going to ask Carlton Bragg to give some consistency. But right now, as we talked about, in that sort of a funk, I think that has to be one of the biggest concerns heading into this season. Things can change over the course of time. We know Carlton Bragg has the talent to get out of this, but at this point, at least early in the season when you're facing these two really tough opponents, they need a good Carlton Bragg, and so far he hasn't shown that against two exhibition opponents.
But here's the thing that is positive for KU, and of course I'm going to bring this back to small ball, Jesse.
Of course,
that's where we take all.
Of course,
yes. But if there was a game where you can get away with maybe having just one big guy who you can count on, and that being Landon Lucas for KU, I think you can get away with playing small a lot in this game because and maybe you match up even better with them when you put Josh Jackson on OG, and we're just going to call him OG because that's a lot easier. OG is more of as we'll talk about with Zach later, he's more of a wing, and they're playing him mostly at the floor. And Indiana is a team that's really going to spread you out and not try to just jam the ball down your throat in the post. They're going to try to spread you out, get you in space. So small lineups might not be a bad thing against Indiana as far as how you match up with them best. And Jesse, I'm really, really looking forward to this game. Not because it's an opener, not because it's just against two name brand schools who are obviously have a lot of history, a lot of the fan bases are similar in a way, but this is just going to be such a fun matchup because if KU does go small and Indiana's going to go small, it's just going to be such a wide open game and so entertaining. And I was at that Duke Indiana game last year. Duke kind of plays similar. They try to play small a lot, although at that time Emil Jefferson was still healthy and Duke was playing a little bit more traditional. But the first, what we remember about that game is just Indiana's offense or defense looking terrible, and Duke just scoring nonstop. But for the first maybe 10, 15 minutes of that game, it was just back and forth, and Indiana was scoring the ball at a high level, and it was really, really fun to watch. And with KU's defense, you can tell me if you think differently, Jesse, but I feel like the defense maybe is a little bit behind at this point than where KU defense usually is, and maybe that's just because of the fact that they're trying to adjust to not having a 4-year starter or a 4-year guy and Ellis in there and having Bragg instead. But I think this could be a really wide open, really fun game to watch, high scoring. And watch it be like 66 to 64, but to me it looks like a fast-paced, high-scoring game that could be fun to watch.
Yeah, well, in Indiana, under Tom Crean, their offense was among the tops in the nation last year. Like you said, going a little bit more to that, I hate to say Duke style, but yeah, you spread the floor, 4 guards, pass out, kick out to shooters. We talked about OG. He's a dangerous shooter out on the perimeter. Thomas Bryant's going to be a big matchup inside. Udoka Azubuike said that he's a guy that he's played with in the past, looking forward to going up against. So, yeah, it should be a great matchup game one. And you talked about being behind defensively. KU gave up – I think KU gave up in the exhibition season just some things that haven't happened as much in the past. There seemed like a lot of transition allowed by KU against Washburn. And, everybody's behind at this point in the year. I think that's what we have to remember. You kind of get – really laser focused on Kansas. You think, they didn't look very good in the exhibition season. Well, basically every team doesn't look good in the exhibition season because nobody has, their full complement of offense or defense or everything in place. But yeah, at this point, like you said, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I can almost see our stories right now, like from 6 months in the future, because we're going to talk about how Carlton Bragg averaged 8 minutes a game against Indiana and Duke and was frustrated by his playing time. And I could absolutely
what a rebound he had,
and what a rebound he had, how he overcame it, because that absolutely could happen in these two games. Because not only is Carlton behind, but like you said, Indiana and Duke are teams that play this sort of outside-in style, and it's only natural, to put Josh Jackson at the 4 and to have that sort of lineup, especially with the limitations of depth that KU has. So it's almost like I can kind of sort of see 5 months in the future when, KU's getting ready for an Elite 8 or a Sweet 16 game, talking about Carlton Bragg and the great comeback he had after averaging 8 minutes per game against Indiana and Duke early in the season, and how he's just let that fuel him into a new season. Maybe what the reality of it is that this is a guy who's not playing his best, who's being challenged by his coach, and who is playing a matchup against two elite teams that Bill Self really wants to beat in matchups that really favors KU playing small, even if they haven't played in the past. So that, to me, is going to be one of the fascinating subplots to see how it plays out. Will KU commit to fully going small? And if they do, it seems like they could have a really good matchup in these first two games.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of interesting to see. I think Bragg is the biggest X factor question mark in these first two games. If he comes out and plays really well, I think Bill Self's going to have to feel good about his chances. If he doesn't, it's going to be interesting to see how he juggles his lineup and really what he does with his rotations. And both these teams are going to test him. I mean, Tom Crean and Mike Krzyzewski are two of the best offensive coaches in the country. I was talking to a scout the other day who had just been at Indiana's practice, and he was like, he said it was really cool to see how much skill development Indiana works on. And I think if you look in there, you can criticize Tom Crean for the defense that his teams have played at times, but offensively his teams are always really good, and player development has always been a strength. You look at a guy like Victor Oladipo and what he did with him, and now OG is kind of the next one in kind of that shape that wasn't a high profile guy, as a high school player, was kind of a diamond in the rough that is going to turn into potentially a lottery pick. And even with their big guys, this guy was telling me, they do all this skill work, all this outside work, having them dribble, in different cone drills, and even Thomas Bryant getting out on the perimeter, and something we'll ask Zach about later on, kind of how they will maybe attack KU and use Thomas Bryant in some interesting ways. So it's going to be a team that's definitely a challenge to guard right off the bat for the Jayhawks.
Really quickly, I wanted to mention too, after this Indiana Duke game, we talked about Carlton Bragg and his potential, growth of this season. I'm reading off of KenPom, KU's win probability for its next scheduled games after that, getting to Big 12 play. 94%, 86%, 99%, 97%, 93%, 99%, 94%, 91%, 92%. So it's amazing how this schedule is flipped for KU this year, where they face two really tough teams to start, and then after that basically have a stretch of games where they shouldn't be challenged, and if they are challenged, they still should. The numbers would tell you should come out and win. So KU's got some time to grow after this. It's just kind of crazy that they really need to be on point to try to win one or two of these first two games, because they're playing such talented competition. Before we get to this interview, CJ, I also want to grill you. I saw the Bleacher Report picks out there, and I saw a certain national title pick. You want to go ahead and go public with your national title pick this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's out there. I picked the Kansas Jayhawks. It was funny because I had to write that maybe a day or two after the Emporia State game. And, you go to the Emporia State game, and anybody who was there and watched that game, man, you don't come away feeling great about KU. But it's kind of been the way I've been leaning all off season, just because Bill Self, traditionally, his teams, after they go to Elite Eight, when it's an experienced team that's kind of building up to something, after they go to Elite Eight, what have they done after that? I think both the years he's gone to Elite Eight at KU, haven't they followed that up with a national title appearance? I guess the first time he didn't, they wouldn't have, because they went to Elite Eight against Georgia Tech in his first year, then the first round the next year. But usually they're kind of building up to something. They've had that tournament success. They've got one of the best backcourts in the country, and I like having that. Just Frank Mason and Devontae Graham understanding how Bill Self wants to play, understanding the team on both sides of the ball. And then, I think Josh Jackson is coming into a much better spot than Andrew Wiggins was, in that he has point guards who can get him the ball in good spots. And the team's just built way better. And while I say that, it's funny to look and see what Joel Embiid's doing now and how he was rapidly improving that year a couple of years ago. What do you think would have played out if Joel Embiid, sorry to distract from my national title pick, but how would that have played out a couple of years ago if Embiid was healthy?
Impossible to know. I mean, you got to figure they beat Stanford, but from then on, you just don't. You don't know. I mean, I remember
point guard was still an issue that year, but man, he was so good.
I remember talking to an odds maker who said that it only affected KU's game per game totals by 1 point if you're looking at the spread. And you also have to remember that while Joel Embiid is doing crazy things in the NBA this year, and he was very good at Kansas. I mean, don't get me wrong. Some of the stuff he did, the dream shake, all those sort of moves, they were, things you hadn't seen before from a big man. But we aren't talking about what Joel Embiid is like now and what he was at Kansas. I mean, like you were saying, he was still developing. He was still kind of a turnover machine and still learning how to get the ball in the post and be an effective scorer. Now, Bill Self will tell you to this day it's one of the most talented, crazy big men that he's ever had. But I don't know that affected KU too much in that game. But again, you would have to assume they would have beaten Stanford, and then from then on, you wonder how the season would have played out. But you just don't know. I mean, that's kind of the question I wanted to pose to an odds maker, and he didn't seem like it made that much of a difference, especially in a team game like basketball. So, and especially with so many other talented players that KU had that year. I mean, they did have Andrew Wiggins. They did have other guys that could play. But I also want to get in there, CJ, that the first time KU loses, the first time that somebody goes down with an injury or there's some bad luck, we're getting used to this thanks Obama thing. I want #ThanksCJ on Twitter. So if KU starts 0-2, direct all your angry emails, all your angry tweets to thanks CJ on Twitter, because while I did not make KU my national title pick, CJ is the one to blame.
Who's your title pick, Jesse?
Don't have one, but I do have KU in the Final Four.
If you look at my not KU.
If you look at my 20-26 story, you'll see KU makes it to the Final Four, but does not win the championship. But still, a positive outlook for KU.
Here's the way I look at it. I see KU and Duke as being like at a tier above everybody else. Kentucky can maybe get there, but I watched Kentucky some in the exhibition, and I know kind of how that roster is made out. I just don't know that it's one of his. While it's really talented roster, I don't know how the pieces fit. And with Duke, they have question marks. If Frank Jackson's really good, I might want to rethink my pick, because he's their freshman point guard coming in, who's a pretty talented kid. But they're looking at going to the season, probably starting Grayson Allen at point guard. They also are dealing with a lot of injuries. I just kind of like how KU is put together and the experience, the fact that those guys have all played together for so long. The core of the group, and then you mix in a really talented freshman with Josh Jackson. Plus, you have Sweezes. I haven't even mentioned Sweezes yet.
And
how about the start Sweezes has had? So it's I think it's a nice blend of talent, experience, and usually those two things go together pretty well for Bill Self.
And you mix in a Midwest bias, and then you have a national title pick. So that's really all you need from CJ Moore. Again, #ThanksCJ on Twitter once KU season starts to look like it's going down the drain. But no, it's good. I want to get to this talk with Zach Osterman of the Indianapolis Star. Looking forward to this game coming up Friday. But we'll go ahead and get to that interview with him right after this short break.
Hey, KU basketball fans, this is Kansas City Star sports writer Blair Kirkhoff. Check out the new KUHoops.com to keep up to date on everything Kansas basketball. KUHoops.com has in-depth analysis from the Star's award-winning sports writing team, as well as news on recruiting, game previews, video highlights, and much more. KUHoops.com will keep you updated on Coach Bill Self as he tries to take the Jayhawks to their 13th straight Big 12 regular season title and into the NCAA tournament. Go to KUHoops.com now on your PC or mobile device.
Now joining us on the Sports Beat KC podcast is Zach Osterman of the Indianapolis Star, covering the Indiana basketball team. Zach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Doing all right, and we're looking forward to this game Friday, KU versus Indiana. I guess just give us, before we start getting into the matchup a little bit, can you give us just kind of the preseason look at Indiana and kind of the expectations for the Hoosiers going into this season?
Yeah, it's an interesting team, a team that obviously on paper lost its two leading scorers from last season, including Yogi Ferrell, who was an All-American as a senior at point guard. And I think a lot of people probably rightly sort of see Indiana as kind of missing. There's kind of a big gap there to fill, and there's no obvious sort of heir to Yogi Ferrell specifically. But on the other hand, you've got a lot of young talent. Thomas Bryant elected not even to sort of mess with the NBA draft. Same for OG Anunoby. You've got Robert Johnson back. You've got James Blackman back. Josh Newkirk, a Pitt transfer, is eligible now. So you've got three juniors in that backcourt. And even with Colin Hartman, who's Indiana's lone senior, out long-term, maybe for the season with a knee injury, there's a lot of depth on this team. So I think, what I've been telling a lot of people about Indiana is I think they're a Big Ten title contender. I think, frankly, there is a Final Four team in this group. but I also don't think that's what they are right now. And I understand that everybody expects to get better as the season goes on, but 3 years ago, Indiana starts the season ranked, or I guess, it's 4 years ago now, isn't it? Indiana starts the season ranked number 1 overall. You looked at that team and said, that team, there's some ways they need to get better and all that, but like that team is a Final Four caliber team right now. This team can be that good, but I don't think it's guaranteed that it will be that good, that it'll get there. I just think that it can. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see this game, Kansas. They played North Carolina in the ACC Big Ten Challenge at home. They got Louisville on New Year's Eve. I'm really interested to see kind of the first couple months of the season and how Indiana rounds out.
Zach, you look at the roster and kind of the makeup, and I obviously I think the biggest question is a point guard. You've had the chance to at least watch Josh in 2 exhibition games. How has he looked so far, and how is maybe their offense different now, just because you don't have Yogi back there, who so much went through him?
Yeah, I mean, Newkirk is, and you're right. We've seen him through 2 exhibitions. We've heard a lot from teammates about how good he's been in practice and how valuable he was as a scout team player last year. Tom Crean said last night, and Jesse, you were there too, and I think this is probably the best way to describe Josh Newkirk right now, is that he's doing everything well, but you get the sense that he could be doing it a lot better. That, if you look at like his numbers, for example, in those 2 exhibition games, he shoots 3 of 8 in one, he shoots 0 of 2 in the other. I think he's missed all of his 3-point tries, and that's something that Indiana's really going to need him to rediscover as his shot. He was a good 3-point shooter as a freshman. He was a significantly poorer 3-point shooter as a sophomore. With the knee surgery he had, you kind of wonder how much that might have affected him during the season. But on the other hand, he's also got, over those 2 exhibition games, 11 assists and just 1 turnover. He showed more explosiveness, frankly. I mean, he had a couple dunks. He had a block off the backboard against, I think it was the Bellarmine game, that suggested a level of explosiveness that we didn't necessarily think he had. And with all respect to Yogi Ferrell, he was an exceptional athlete, but I can't remember Yogi Ferrell dunking the ball more than maybe one time. So it maybe suggests that Newkirk has just a little bit more sort of vertical athleticism to him than we thought. And it's just kind of one of those things where I think what Indiana needs from him is to just kind of be smart and to understand that, he's got good shooters around him, guys like Johnson and Blackman, even OG Anunoby, who between IU's 2 exhibition games shot 7 of 11 from behind the 3-point line, or I think it was actually 7 of 12. But he's got, really talented forwards. Thomas Bryant, obviously. I would throw Juwan Morgan into that mix. I think Deron Davis, a freshman from Colorado who arrived to campus late, is going to come along well as the season progresses. But what Indiana needs right now is more for him to just kind of be steady. He doesn't, Yogi Ferrell did everything for that team. He was a great scorer. He was obviously left as Indiana's all-time leader in assists and games played. He was even, frankly, I always thought kind of an underrated rebounder. He understood the value of, if he rebounds the ball, the break gets started that much faster. And in Indiana's high-tempo offense, that's important. Indiana doesn't need all those things from Josh Newkirk. What it needs from him right now, I mean, an 11-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio is probably a little bit inflated by the level of competition, but a solid sort of handle on the offense, how to keep the ball moving, how to find guys in the right spots without making a ton of mistakes, and then letting stuff, particularly like the scoring, the 3-point shooting, letting that kind of come as he gets his sea legs back under him. I think that's what Indiana needs from Newkirk right now.
Again, talking with Zach Osterman of the Indianapolis Star. I wanted to get to 2 guys in particular because these are the 2 guys I think KU fans are going to hear about most. You mentioned Thomas Bryant. I'm looking at his line from last year, an amazingly efficient player. If I'm looking across his stat line and what he was able to do, not only that, but on the glass. And then you talked about OG Anunoby, who I hope I said that right, but I've seen him on a lot of lists as most improved player in the country, maybe expected to take a huge leap this year. And you talked about a little bit about the exhibition games. Can you talk about those 2 players in particular and what KU fans can expect from them on Friday?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, Bryant is the more sort of household name, I guess you'd call him right now. He averaged, he was a starter through all of last season. He averaged, if I'm remembering correctly, about 11.5 points and 6 rebounds, something like that. You're right, he he finished last season with the best 2-point field goal percentage, and I think the best overall field goal percentage in the Big Ten, if I'm not mistaken. He's an exceptional finisher around the rim. He doesn't take a lot of bad shots offensively. You'll see him, I think, step out a little bit more, and he wasn't, I want to say he shot 5 of 15 for behind the three-point line last season. So it's not like he doesn't have those skills. He's not Kevin Durant. He's not going to live and die out there or anything like that, but he will try to step away a little bit more. He's gotten stronger in the off season. I think he's going to be a better rebounder this year, and he was a pretty good rebounder last year, particularly if you look at his percentages. The big thing for him is kind of, can he sustain longer minutes, which I think is anything you ask of a guy that, there aren't a lot of freshmen that athletically come into college and can play 30, 32 minutes a night. And Indiana didn't really need him to last year either, with Max Bielfeldt, with Juwan Morgan, with some other guys on their roster. He had some on and off foul trouble that I think he got a little bit better with as last season went on. But if he's going to be the centerpiece for this team, and I think he is, I think he's eventually a Big Ten a Big Ten Player of the Year contender, if not a Big Ten Player of the Year front runner. And if he's going to be that, he has got to be much more consistent about not getting into foul trouble, particularly early foul trouble. And then he said this even through last season. He's got to become a better defender, and he's good at being sort of vertical, but he's got to get quicker laterally. He's got to be able to kind of defend the paint, in a number of different directions. So he's a guy that's probably going to wind up being a first-round pick, maybe a lottery pick, depending on how he improves. But it is, Anunoby is the one that kind of holds a little bit more intrigue. It not to sort of overblow the storyline, but he wasn't even, I don't think, a top 250 player. I remember talking to Brian Snow, who works for Scout in recruiting and lives in Indianapolis, so he's very familiar with IU recruiting and Midwest recruiting. And when IU committed Anunoby out of high school, he's from Jefferson City, Missouri, Snow told me, he just said, not only did I not really know who he was a year ago, I'd literally never heard of him. So he was a very off-the-radar guy. He had some good offers, Iowa, Georgia, Ole Miss. I think there were a couple of other schools in sort of Indiana's, range of expectation that were sniffing around him. And he didn't play a lot in the preseason, but he just kind of exploded. He averaged, 30 points and 4 rebounds over or 10 points and 4 rebounds a game over IU's first 3 Big Ten games last year. He had a great NCAA tournament. And he is, very much in kind of that 3-and-D mold that you hear NBA people talking about now. He's 6'8", 230, 235. He's a great defender, can move laterally very well. Can defend 4, if not 5 positions. I don't know if you'd see him, for example, defending Thomas Bryant, but I don't think Indiana would have a problem with him switching onto a player like Thomas Bryant for, a few seconds in a possession. He's an incredibly efficient player. If I'm reading my stats right, he did not miss a 2-pointer during the 2 exhibition games, and I think his effective field goal percentage last season was 62.5. So he takes smart shots. He can knock down threes. The big question I've asked of Anunoby, he's got to get better, in terms of turnovers and handling the ball, but I don't think that's a huge surprise. The big question I've asked of him is, he was such an efficient player last season. He shot almost 45% from outside the three-point line. He shot something like 62% inside on 2-pointers alone. Can he sustain that when he's playing 27 minutes a night, not 13 and a half minutes a night? And if you look at it again, I think he shot 16 of 21 between IU's 2 preseason games. And, I'm trying to think of the 3-pointers he missed. He missed 1 wing 3-pointer that just kind of rimmed out. He missed 1 that he probably forced. Probably the only shot I would say he forced in the preseason. He's really good around the rim. He's very explosive. The question that I think we get answered for him on Friday is, how does he handle it when he's being defended by a guy who is just as athletic, who is just as long and rangy? You'll know better than me who Kansas will match him up with, but he can certainly eat up the lesser competition, and he's just kind of one of those guys that, like I said, 3-and-D is kind of what comes to mind. He's really good defensively. He's really very, very efficient offensively, and he's just kind of a smart player that doesn't force much.
Zach, I love OG. I think he's down the road, I think he'll be the best player on that roster, whether it's this year or, in 5 years as far as pro potential. But It looks like Indiana so far is playing him at the 4. Is that where he was playing most at least started there? Is that where he's playing most of his minutes? And, I think that is kind of an intriguing matchup for when KU goes big. How do they match up with him? And then when they go small, I'm sure the Anobi Josh Jackson matchup could be pretty fun.
Yeah, I mean, not to bite into the term positionless basketball too much, but I mean, certainly where they start him, I would expect, although I would not take this, as gospel, I would expect Indiana to go with the 3 guards plus Anunoby and Bryant tomorrow. Newkirk, Johnson, Blackman plus those 2. So I guess in theory, if you're giving them a position, it's the 4, but they will switch almost anything defensively. He really will defend 4, if not 5 positions, and they will put the ball in his hands and run things through him at times offensively. Not just him. I mean, Tom Crean is fond of saying that Juwan Morgan is one of his backup point guards. Juwan Morgan's a 6'7", 6'8" forward from Missouri. And I mean, going back to last season, I have seen Indiana put Juwan Morgan at point guard. It's not like a long-term thing, but they can do it. He can handle the ball, and he can pass it very well for a player of his size. So I mean, if you want to give him like a specific position, I guess it'd probably be 4. But if there are moments where Indiana goes big and say it's like Johnson, Morgan, Anunoby, Deron Davis, Thomas Bryant, he'll be playing the 2. I mean, he really is a guy that can fit into a lot of different positions, not unlike, and I'm not comparing impact or anything like that or trying to say that he's going to be this good or this good, but I mean, that's somewhat what Indiana would do with Victor Oladipo. I mean, they wouldn't maybe move him to the 4 or the 5 as much, but they'd go small and he'd be maybe the second biggest guy on the floor. Or Troy Williams, who he was up and down at times with Troy Williams, but they'd put him at the 2, then they'd put him at the 4. Sometimes even on some of their smaller teams, they put him at the 5. So they will. OG Anunoby, there's nothing they won't try with him on the floor. Let's put it that way.
Again, we're talking with Zach Osterman of the Indianapolis Star here. Zach, I did want to ask you, can you give us the 1 or 2 minute version for everybody who wasn't following Indiana last year? The first vision I have in my head, and maybe this is just selective because I just happened to tune into that game, but I remember watching part of the Duke game at Duke, and a 62 possession game, Indiana gave up 94 points to Duke, and just thinking this program is completely lost. They can't guard anybody. How did it go from that to what it ended up being, a 27-8 season, beating Kentucky in the round of 32? What changed? Can you give us the 1 or 2 minute version of what happened with Indiana last year and how Tom Crean was able to turn things around?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have this in Kansas or wherever, but there's a few IU fans that are really active on Twitter that we in the media have kind of wound up becoming sort of friendly with in a social media way. And one of them's a guy named Pete Oren, who coined the term Lahaina layup line after Indiana's frankly disastrous trip to Maui. And then you talk about Duke. I think Kim Pomeroy said they gave up 1.52 points per possession, which was the most points per possession he'd ever seen Duke average against like a high major conference opponent. So I mean, it was abject, frankly, and there's no. In one respect, they started to get better defensively just by kind of, I think, drilling down and getting back to some basics. If you watch that Duke game, they tried 1,000 different defenses. CJ, you were there that night, I think, and they kept switching defenses, and you almost felt like that was almost making it worse. It somewhat just kind of handed defensive duties over to one of their assistants, Rob Judson, who seemed to sort of simplify things and just kind of get back to some real basics. And they got slowly but progressively better defensively. If you look at, even some of the low and mid-major teams they played back in a non-conference play, if you look at like what they were averaging when they came in versus what Indiana did, they held, I think, something like 7 out of 9 or 8 out of 10 teams in a row under a point per possession. They had a really easy start to conference play, which I think was important. They had like Rutgers, Illinois, Minnesota twice, Northwestern, Ohio State, and Wisconsin. And they used that to start 7-0, and I think that built a lot of momentum. And then when they got into this really, really difficult part of their schedule from about like early February on through the end, they just kind of had maybe discovered a little bit more of a defensive identity. And also they'd lost James Blackman, but that had sort of maybe crystallized some roles for other guys, maybe injected a sense of urgency to say, if we don't have a 17-point-a-game scorer or a 15-point-a-game scorer, or whatever he was when he went out, we're really going to need to kind of everybody else needs to knuckle down. Our margin for error is a lot slimmer. And what I thought, I don't know if people said this, but sort of what I felt watching that team was that when they had Blackman and early in the season, they thought our offense is what makes us elite. It's what really makes us go. That's what we're going to focus on, because if we're going to win games, if we're going to achieve what we want to achieve, it's going to be through this just like high octane offense. And when they lost Blackman, I think they kind of had to look at it and say, we can't just outrun and outscore people anymore. We've got to be able to get some key defensive stops to build momentum through defense. And it took a while, and I think that, I would happily accept the argument that if you literally just flipped Indiana's Big Ten schedule around and they had to open with Maryland and at Iowa and, Purdue at home and all these tough games they had from like Valentine's Day on last year, it maybe isn't the same season. But they used they took Duke as a low point and then used the kind start to conference play and just built enough momentum to become a better team. And then, they wound up winning the Big Ten by 2 games and going to the Sweet 16.
Zach, what's the how would you judge how Indiana, the fan base, sees Tom Crean now? Because, last year early on when they went to Maui and after that Duke game, I sensed, and I wrote at the time, that I thought he was kind of not in a good spot as far as his future going forward, because he'd lost the fan base in many ways. And, he had a group that he'd had for a couple of years that couldn't really defend, and credit to him that they figured it out. But, he's always been a guy that it seems like the Indiana fan base has kind of not ever been super hot on, at least for the last couple of years. Where is he now as far as his, how the Indiana fan base feels about him and kind of with the program going forward?
I think he won a lot of people back last year, and I think he should have. I think that's fair. Yeah. Even and I'm just sort of an objective observer, but I'll readily say that I did not think Tom had that kind of recovery in him. And frankly, I'm not sure how many coaches really would. I think that's as much a credit to him as anything. I'm not sure how many coaches would have been able to take, what we saw from Maui and Duke and then losing James Blackman and kind of having this, as you talked about, the pitchforks were out to some degree for Tom Crean, and to sort of weather all of that and get through all of that and not just kind of build, I guess, a good season, but to turn it so, around so much. To basically just 180 degrees to become, Big Ten champions. I think he did a fantastic job coaching in a lot of different ways. And I think, at the same time, Indiana's like Kansas. They're always going to, they expect that their down years are 22, 23 wins and around a 32 appearance, and their up years, they're a Final Four contender. And so I think there are a lot of people that are looking at this team and saying, we lost Yogi Ferrell, we lost Troy Williams, but there's an awful lot of talent back. We expect this year to be as good as, or maybe even better than last year. But I don't think that's a reflection on how they feel about Tom, so much as it is a reflection on what they expect of their program. Indiana, it's obviously been a very long time. This will be the 30-year anniversary of their last national title. But ultimately, this is still the team with the most Big Ten championships in conference history. This is a team with 5 national titles, a rich basketball tradition that's never going to go away. And they're going to expect that when they've got a team that's got this much talent and this much depth, that they do something pretty special with it. So, I don't think that fan expectation this year is necessarily that guy better get it done, or else we're going to change our opinion of him. I think it's more just hey, we should be really good this season, and we're Indiana, so when we have a good team, we expect a good season. But I think that he turned a lot of people around last year, and rightly and fairly so. I think it was a fantastic coaching job.
Zach, before we let you go, one thing you're interested to see in this matchup between KU and Indiana on Friday, and then just a quick prediction of how you think it's going to go.
It's kind of a weird one, and I'll admit I have not deep dive studied Kansas just because it's also the middle of IU football season, and while IU's a basketball school, we've still got to kind of split our time. But
I hear you. I definitely hear you.
I'm curious to see the sort of backcourt front court dynamic, because on one hand, I think Kansas has a real backcourt advantage, and Tom Crean has spent the last week talking about how fast Kansas is, how fast they run, which is saying something for a coach who, I was sitting right behind Indiana's bench in the IU Kentucky game in the Sweet 16 in 2012, and against probably the best college basketball team I've ever covered live. Tom Crean is sitting there telling his team to keep going faster and keep going faster. This is not a coach that slows down very much. He believes in speed. He believes in tempo and pace. And if he says Kansas is fast, something that you would have to imagine is driven by those veteran guards they have, then I believe that they are a very fast team. On the other hand, I know Indiana is not going to face a team more talented than Kansas this year. That's just reality. Like there might be a better team somewhere down the line they face, but there's not a more talented team. I'm curious to see how they match up with Bryant and Anunoby, and to a lesser extent, guys like Juwan Morgan and Deron Davis and some of these bigger lineups Indiana can throw at them, because I think that is what Tom Crean's best teams at Indiana and probably even at Marquette have always been kind of guard driven. And he's got some great guards on this team, I think, especially long term, is that sort of 3 junior backcourt gels with a couple of freshmen who won't be needed to do too much, Devontae Green and Curtis Jones, but I think eventually will become, good role players. But this is a team where its greatest talent is centered in its front court. And I'm curious to see how other teams match up with that, and therefore how Indiana kind of, tries to counter that or respond to it, because I can understand as much as that backcourt for Kansas might have an advantage on Indiana. I imagine it's going to be very difficult for any coach to deal with game planning and scouting Thomas Bryant and OG Anunoby in the same lineup, because those are two guys that can rebound the ball well. One of them shoots threes at a high rate. The other one they're both incredibly efficient around the rim. One of them's an explosive athlete. The other one's got a 7'6" wingspan. I think Kansas wins. Personally, Indiana also had a number of injuries through the offseason and the preseason. James Blackman had an ACL tear in late December. Rob Johnson and Juwan Morgan both needed off-season surgery. Colin Hartman is again out for a long time, if not the entire season, with a knee injury, the specific nature of which Indiana has declined to share with us. And Josh Newkirk is a guy that I think Indiana is going to get a lot out of down the line, but he had knee surgery. He's only been healthy since maybe mid-January, and he hasn't played a live basketball game in almost 2 years. So I think that Indiana is going to be kind of rough around the edges in a way that obviously every team is not a complete package at this time of year, but I don't think Indiana even necessarily got as much out of preseason as it would have hoped. So I think it's a good game. I hope it's a good game. I think it's a competitive game, but right now I see more to use, since we are just fresh off of election season, I see more paths to a Kansas victory than to an Indiana victory. But then again, I guess if we're talking elections, it's not like we haven't seen something unexpected there in the last week either. So,
hey Zach, I had one last quick question before you go. I know Jesse said that was the last one, but I always like to throw in one more question. Thomas Bryant, Tom Crean has always used his big men, I think, in interesting ways. I remember when he had Cody Zeller, they would give him like a lot of, try to get him the ball in space in the 17, 18 area and take advantage of his quickness. Bryant has always, to me, been a little bit heavy-footed, but I know Indiana is so focused on developing skill, whether it's ball handling, getting their guys to be able to operate in space. That includes their bigs. Landon Lucas for KU is a guy that, is more comfortable kind of guarding the paint, maybe not, laterally the quickest. Do you see them, and have they done this in the preseason, trying to get Bryant the ball? I know you said he's, maybe shoot some more threes this year, but get Bryant the ball in that 17, 18-foot area and just kind of get him space and try to get him attacking off the bounce. I think that's one thing that could kind of be interesting to watch in this game.
I think they definitely could. There is actually a sort of through the looking glass moment in the Bellarmine exhibition where Deron Davis was posted up against, some kid that was like 6'6", and Thomas Bryant was dribbling out at the wing behind the 3-point line and fed him the ball. So watching a 6'10" kid feed a 6'10" kid on a post-up was a little bit strange to watch, even against a Division II team. But I think they could. To your point, I think Cody was a little bit better handling the ball, and therefore they were more comfortable kind of putting him in those sort of high post situations and letting him attack downhill. They did a little bit of it with Noah Vonleh too. It's hard to kind of compare that because Vonleh was only on campus for 9 months, ultimately. I'm not sure Bryant, it's a combination of you're right, I don't think he's quite as explosive for his size as Zeller was, and I'm not sure he's got quite as tight of a handle. But on the other hand, I think that Indiana likes the idea of putting him in space and seeing if they can't get some weird advantageous matchups, maybe a guard switches onto him or something like that, or again, kind of drifting him out to the three-point line, letting him take the occasional three. I think they would like him to do that, maybe more frankly than they did Cody Zeller. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think Zeller attempted 15 three-point shots his entire career in Indiana.
Yeah.
And that's what Bryant tried last year, if I'm remembering my stats right. So I think they could. I think, let's say this, I think they will move him out to the perimeter. I don't know if they will use him in all the same ways they did Zeller, but I absolutely think you will see him out, around or behind the three-point line at times.
Zach, where can we check out your stuff online?
It's indystar.com/sports, INDY star.com/sports, and then just Twitter's my name, @Zach Osterman. So keep it pretty basic there.
Hey, well, we appreciate you joining us, and like I said earlier, hopefully a good game to start off the season. I think these two teams definitely, from talking to the coaches, looking forward to playing in what can be considered one of the great blue blood matchups of the season.
Yeah, no, I think I would share all those sentiments.
All right, thanks again to Zach for joining us, and thanks to all you guys out there for checking out the Sports Beat KC podcast. Be sure to check us out again next week.